Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Faces in FinOps podcast, powered by ProsperOps. I'm your host, Jon Myer. Now, the Faces in FinOps podcast is all about highlighting thought leaders in the cloud financial management space and insights in how they're making an impact within their organization and the broader FinOps community. Now, I have a really special and awesome episode happening today. Not only do we have two guests on the show, but this is the first time that we have guests from Google joining us to talk not only about cloud FinOps, but generative AI. How about we kick things off and introduce our guest? Daniel, thanks for joining me.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Eric, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here as well, John, and looking forward to the conversations today.
Now, we do have a lot to talk about, but I want to give our guests a chance to really introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit more about it. Daniel, how about you tell everybody a little bit more about yourselves, what you're doing at Google?
Sure, absolutely. And thanks for this opportunity, John. Really excited as well. And you know my name, Daniel Pettibone. I'm with the Google Cloud Consulting Organization, and I head up our digital transformation practice for North America. And one of the key areas that we work with our customers in is specifically around FinOps and helping our customers on their FinOps journey. Oftentimes starting with cost optimization, but really going a lot further than that. And definitely this is something that continues to grow and evolve, and we're excited to be at the forefront of the industry. As for myself, I've been with Google about 4 years, and prior to that, spent many years in management consulting. And I absolutely enjoy the opportunity to work with amazing teams here at Google and with our wonderful customers, oftentimes on a global basis. So that's a bit about me.
Daniel, thank you so much. Eric, what are you doing at Google? What's your role?
Thanks again for the opportunity, John. So I sit under the Google Cloud Consulting practice within digital transformation, and I lead our cloud FinOps for North America. And as Daniel mentioned, we'll work with customers on a day-to-day basis, really from advising them on driving the FinOps strategy through helping them with the implementations of FinOps capability end to end. I'm actually very excited as we embark on this journey 3+ years ago, and the conversation continues to evolve, right? As one of the key areas that we started with was cost optimizations. How do I actually optimizing my cloud spend? And now the conversation evolved to, as you mentioned, generative AI. How do we enable cloud FinOps with Gen AI, or how do I use cloud FinOps disciplines and best practices to then maximize the Gen AI investment? So it's very exciting to be in this area, and definitely looking forward to the conversations.
Eric, why I got you, how did you get involved in FinOps?
Great question, John. So prior to Google, I spent my last 15+ years in management consulting, and primarily focused in the cloud strategy space. And before cloud FinOps per se, as an evolving sort of discipline, is people also call it as cloud financial management. I work closely with a lot of CIOs and CFOs all around, helping them create a case for change, a case for transformation in the cloud. And those conversations evolve from here's my business case for the cloud to how do I manage my cloud spend. I'm seeing my cloud spend is exceeding my data center on-prem spend. So how do I manage that? So hence the practice, the knowledge, the capabilities continue to evolve, and cloud financial management sort of become the key discipline. And as we work closely with J.R. Storman, one of the initial sort of early thought leaders from the FinOps Foundations, realized this is a very key area that many of our customers need. Hence, we are then fully committed in cloud FinOps.
Eric, I like how you actually talked about not only FinOps, cloud financial management, working with the FinOps Foundation. I actually have a question. I'm going to ask it to Daniel in a second, but Daniel, I want to understand, how did you get involved in FinOps?
Yeah, great question. I would say similar answer to Eric, insofar as previously I had done a lot of work with clients around IT financial management, strategy, and how that just ties into the overall business transformation. And oftentimes also as it pertains to integrations, mergers, sometimes some spin-offs. There's obviously always a very significant financial component. And so part of what I had done previously was work with customers to start to move towards a more mature internal billing models for their IT services. And that was kind of what gave me, I guess you could say, my start in the world of certainly IT financial management, broader financial management, some budgeting, but a very natural transition into FinOps. And obviously then the promise of a usage-based on-demand model. The reality is unless you are truly a digital native, you're always working in multiple worlds. And so, one of the things that I find to be, it's an ongoing challenge, but it's also a fascinating challenge is just working with customers, meeting them where they are on that journey. We call it a journey a lot. Maybe that's an overused term, but I think it's true insofar as where are you looking to go? What is your end state that you're aiming for, and how are you actually going to get there? And what I see time and again is the fact that it is not a one and done. It is a cycle, and it's really important to realize that with FinOps, as with anything else for that matter. And so as FinOps grows as an area, for lack of a better term, I think what we'll see is it becoming more ingrained into the day in and day out operations of organizations. And that's something that, we're starting to see that shift now. And as far as your specific question, John, I would say that how do I, with Google and how did I get directly involved? It's like many things that there was an interest. We had a community of practice. And what we started doing is saying, hey, there's something here. We can really work with our customers. We can help, and we can help move the ball down the field and advance it. And that's how we started, with that mindset. So kind of an innovation, and let's take something and run with it. And so we built up a capability and a practice with that mindset. And I've been working with Eric from the beginning in Google with this specific area.
Daniel, when you did your introduction before, you talked about cost optimization, and Eric mentioned the same thing in cloud financial management. And I love asking this question. I want to understand from your perspective, is there a difference between FinOps and CFM, cloud financial management?
Well, I guess it depends on who you ask. For one thing.
That's a really good answer, because I keep hearing that from the same people. It depends on who you're talking to and how you understand, but keep going.
I think that the goals are the same. I think that perhaps the techniques, perhaps are how you view the world maybe are different. But at the end of the day, I think what we're talking about is transparency, visibility, actionable information into how you're spending your IT dollars, just for lack of a better term. And to me, in that way, it's the same. But I think FinOps, especially now, is a practice that's sort of in many ways, I don't know if it's too bold to say it's sort of like born out of the cloud, but it's really based around cloud spend and everything that comes with that. So that's where I see FinOps as an application, and maybe it's just an evolution. But at the same time, I think in order to drive real value, you do have to understand your total spend. You do have to understand that, and all the levers that you can pull. So, and further, there's many clouds, so it's not just one. So getting that complete picture is what's, I think, the most important thing. And there I see parallels from how somebody might define CFM or FinOps. It's certainly all in the same domain.
Yeah, and John, I actually want to add to that too, and I agree with Daniel. Right, it's certainly the definitions, the question that you asked, what is FinOps, varies quite a bit, and hence when the terminologies come out, when started 3+ years ago, Google has our opinion view of what I actually call it cloud FinOps, and not just FinOps, right? So FinOps in traditional sort of corporate finance, FP&A sense, is financial operations. But cloud FinOps, right, by our definition, is an operational framework, and it's a cultural shift, right? The fact is that it's now the conversations that bring technology, finance, and business leaders together, right? And going back to Daniel's point is driving that financial accountability. And more so often is how can companies, organizations using the cloud FinOps discipline to accelerate the business value realizations, right? So we are very, very keen on the fact that it is a conversation beyond cost optimization, and the narrative is around helping companies instilling that cost-conscious culture mindset to accelerate the business value in the cloud, right? Hence the term cloud FinOps.
I think for sure, cost optimization is front and center as it should be, but it is one component of really a cycle. And you can almost think of it in a way as a flywheel, because the more that you're able to drive optimization and savings, that should in theory free up opportunity to reinvest in the business. And that, I think that's really what we're going for. I don't know if that answers the question of what is CFM versus FinOps, but it's got to be related at some point.
So I'll tell you what, cost optimization is a byproduct of doing cloud FinOps, in my opinion, right? Because you're not saving money, you're making money. And in order to do that, you cost optimize in certain benefits. Your definition, the immediate thing that you said was depends on who you're talking to, and you have to understand what they're talking to. That captured everything. And it's fun. I want to actually get to our topic today and tell everybody how we came about. Now, Eric, we didn't know each other before actually getting onto this. I reached out to you because I saw a LinkedIn post, and your LinkedIn post, and I have it printed out here, The Next Frontier, Cloud FinOps Powered by Generative AI.
Nice.
And we weren't even connected. I was like, wow, this is cool. Let me read this. I read the article and I reached out to you on LinkedIn. I was like, Eric, I'd love for you to be on the podcast to talk more about this. I am big on cloud FinOps, and I'm also big on generative AI. Obviously, there are two hot topics this year alone. The thing that I want to talk about, and I'm going to actually pass this to you, Daniel, is like, what are some of the challenges in cloud FinOps before AI? Because we have to get to understand those before we can actually get to the document that both of you guys had a hand in creating. By the way, excellent work. But prior to integrating of a generative AI, what are some of the most daunting challenges in implementing cloud FinOps practices? And then I want to talk about how generative AI can help. Daniel?
Sure, absolutely. Really great question. And I'd have to say that certainly one of the biggest challenges is, and this is going to sound a little strange, getting the right visibility. See what I did there? And what I mean by that is specifically understanding at the right level of the business. So first of all, in order for, I believe this, and I think this is definitely part of the core of our sort of mindset, is FinOps is something that is not just one person's responsibility or one department's responsibility. It's part of that cultural shift that Eric was talking about. And so that means that many people across an organization have a role to play. So getting that awareness of what is FinOps and what does this mean for me is one of the biggest challenges. And that is as much of a people and organizational and cultural challenge as anything. Secondly, I would say is just being able to gain access in an efficient way to the data. And it's easier, of course, when you're in the cloud, but it also goes back to the point of when we're talking cloud FinOps, but to get a complete picture, you need to have insight into the majority of your spend, or certainly where the big spend buckets are. And that is not easily done. It doesn't normally exist in one place. And so therefore, being able to collect and normalize and maintain that data and have the resources to be able to do that and the skills to be able to do that is not something that is necessarily just sitting around.
No, just to add to Daniel's point, right? I do see that, a lot of time when FinOps practitioners, consultants, right? Imagine, in Google Cloud alone, right, you 50,000 SKUs. And then you combine with other cloud service providers into the mix, trying to draw insights to Daniel's point out of those massive data sets is not easy. It can be pretty mundane and tedious at times. And how do you quickly, right, when we think about Gen AI use cases and what typically they are, right, it falls into essentially 4 buckets, right? One, certainly the name itself, content creations, generating, right, new capability based on existing content. 2 is about summarizations, right? And this is where, able to ingest and process massive amount of data and able to then elevate that and summarize that, right, and draw out specific insights. that can be more relevant, right, to a FinOps practitioner, that is very powerful, right? And that's why I see that there's a significant, right, opportunity for us or in front of us as far as how we leverage Gen AI to help drive the adoption of FinOps at scale.
So I want to tell you that I'm on the pro side of generative AI helping FinOps. Why a lot of people might understand and think that generative AI is going to take some jobs. I think it's going to elevate jobs and remove some of those mundane tasks. I want to talk about a couple of those mundane tasks, things that you're doing normally that Gen AI could help with. And your document actually calls out a couple of those. By the way, well written, guys. I really appreciate it. I have it. I share it out. It's a great piece of material that highlights the value of Gen AI within cloud FinOps. But talk about Gen AI. Now, we talked about the challenges without using Gen AI, visibility. Daniel, you hit it on the head, visibility into the reporting structure of how you get all this data and visualize it. There's too much data. Not one person or not one team can help see what this data looks like. But how is Gen AI going to take all this data and elevate the important parts of it so that you can take actions from it? Daniel?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny that you should mention that. We've actually created a solution using Gen AI to help solve for that specifically. And I think at the heart of it, it's about being able to be presented with insights without having to go and dig through, thousands and thousands of lines of data and information, or do things that typically have been done manually. Whereas you can now have this essentially not only insights, but also recommended next steps, recommended actions, do this, or also smarter alerts around, let's say, cost anomalies, actions to take to prevent it, or to decrease, unwanted spend, for lack of a better term. These are simple examples of where Gen AI comes into play very significantly, because we're talking about massive amounts of data that's not possible for an individual to be able to sort through. And you can have this automated, the analysis thereof, and you can have recommendations and next steps literally served up to you in a way that is not just, it's very targeted. It's timely, it's targeted, and it's highly customized. And I think that's what's the most important thing. And it learns. So therefore, you have a dynamic resource that's available to you to really help day in and day out when you think about it from an operational standpoint. But also, then, where do you want people to focus their time? I think, John, to what you're saying, where do you want people to focus their efforts? And there's creating the opportunity to focus on areas. Maybe it's around analysis, maybe it's around planning, maybe it's around what's next, and taking away the toil. And to me, that's what I see as one of the biggest benefits, especially in the short term, like now, when it comes to how to leverage Gen AI and FinOps.
Eric, hasn't generative AI already been playing a role within cost optimization? Just think about it, right? All cloud providers, including Google, are making recommendations on how you can do cost optimization. So hasn't it always been there with regards to cost optimization?
Yeah, that's a very good call out, John. And I think this is where taking that next step, right? Not only do you think about the recommendations that we're surfacing, right, based on your billing data and so forth, is how do you go about taking action on it? And also, it's enabling everyday power users, right, to ask basic questions. What's my top 10 sort of Google Cloud product and services? What capabilities, what services, what business are using the most spend like this month? Those seem to be a trivial question, but in order to get access to it, you have to comb through all that data, make it accessible, and then create a number of reporting dashboard, right? That's to address that. But now, with the power of Gen AI, basically everyday users can simply go to that prompt, ask the questions, and give you the data real time, right? And then give you that visibility you need. And then the other piece around cost optimizations is what we have found is the data that presented as is today is not enough to make informed action. Meaning you need to correlate the information regarding your recommendation to your actual usage, your actual consumptions, and also have to consider the application context, right? Like you can, as a FinOps practitioner, and you see all these cost optimization recommendation on the console or whatnot, it's just one step in that cost optimization process. The next step you often have to do is to then get the application and business context on why certain architectures, applications run in such a way, why are there all these idle instances or services that are not in use, and then figure that out, right? So with the generative AI aspect, is able to correlate, pulling in different contexts together so that you can get better informed insights to make your cost optimization action work.
Daniel, we were talking about, and Eric actually touched on it, that you can go into it and like ChatGPT, give me my top 10, right? And start to correlate, give me, what are my top 10 cost instances that, of today, right? But how do you know the data is valid and trusted? Because we all know that when we enter this kind of question, whether it's in an interface, whatever it's doing, and you're trying to say, hey, listen, give me my top 10, we all know that we have to ask the question a couple of times before it learns what we're doing. At what point is the data trustworthy that we know we can perform an action on it?
Sure, great question. I would say that if we're not there already, we're certainly very close. The other thing is to think about how the model is trained and tuned and with what data. And I think that there's a process that you need to go through, especially when it comes to this topic and the individuals, if you will, that are going to be using this technology. I think one of the beauties of Gen AI is that it's accessible. Or hopefully will be even more accessible in such a way that it's very user friendly, and it's something that can be pervasive. So it takes away in certain ways barriers that have existed, and I think that's a really important point. So you can put the power of these tools in the hands of more people across your organization. That's one thing. But in terms of your question around, hey, how can we trust it? Do we believe it? I think certainly, time will tell. But also, if the model is trained on your own data, and you have gone through, let's say, a period of evaluating that, then there should be a high level of trust and confidence in the results that are being output. It's a really important point and a really valid one. But then there's also, it's like, what are you asking? What are you asking?
Yep.
What are you looking back? Are you looking back for general guidance from the world, or are you looking back for something specific to your organization? And I think there's an important, nuance there insofar as how much you would trust it, how much you need to trust it.
I think when we were talking about before about, generative AI taking over roles, I think what it's doing, it's transforming roles where it's those who are managing the data sets that are being trained in order to, accurately pull your data and to validate the data and make sure you're only showing a subset of data. Because to your point, Daniel, there gets to be and I'm going to have to say point again, where you have too much data and it's analysis by paralysis, where you just have so much visibility, where generative AI is going to allow you and provide only the information that you need at that time to make an informed decision.
And John, just to add, right, as you can think about a typical sort of generative AI model, right, there's three patterns. One is the foundation model, where we see customers basically building their own large language modeling from scratch. The second is the fine-tune model, right? And as Daniel mentioned, you do need to augment that with your own data set, right? Your own Google Cloud building data. So then you can be certain, right, that the model is trained based on your own data sets. And then as time goes by, right, the more information that you can feed in the model, the more context it has, then it become more accurate, right? And I think there's always certainly that risk, but then that's involving model tuning, prompt engineering, and as time goes by, it becomes a model that you can leverage on. And so I think that will take time, right? But at the same time, right now, what we have seen with many customers is very specifically training on your own sort of building data and using that model to do so.
Eric, that's actually a really valid point that you're training on your model, you're training on your data, and over time, the data is going to be, and it's all your data, so it should be trustworthy to Daniel's point as well. Eric, I want to talk about a little bit more about your document where you had the framework for the cloud FinOps for generative AI. You mentioned there's a couple of pillars within it. Do you want to talk a little bit more about it?
Yeah, absolutely, John. I think, when we introduce this framework, and to help our customers, there's typically, common questions, right? That, with all this excitement over Gen AI, one is, how do I actually calculate the cost of these Gen AI use cases? Two, how do I quantify the business value? And three, how do I prioritize the investment, right, for Gen AI use cases so that essentially at the end of the day, able to maximize my investment dollars? So, what we have then come up with is a, sort of 5 key sort of pillars, if you will, to this framework. The first part of it is Gen AI enablement, right? So this is really focusing on training, enablement, and ensuring that you have the right skill sets, right, within the team and organizations to leverage the right model, figuring out, what is the best architecture and so forth. The second pillar is cost allocations, right? You could imagine that the L1 model alone is not the only cost, right? In order to drive and extrapolate the value of the model, essentially you need to ensure, one, we talk about security. Two, right, we have to have the data, the storage. Three, you have to continuously train and tune it. So there's a number of other services that evolve around this Gen AI, so LM model alone. So allocating those costs become very important. The third is model optimizations. Choosing the right model is important, as far as also understanding, what data to train on, understanding your deployment model, like how you then deploy that into production, right? What we have seen with many customers is a lot of the Gen AI use cases are still in their sort of early pilot MVP phases. But then once you have that, put it in place and solidified it and getting into production at scale, model optimization is very, very important. The fourth aspect of the framework that we discussed in the paper is pricing model structure, right? So right now within Google, we have, a lot of time the industry term called tokens, right? So it's number of words, characters, and so forth. So the way that we charge customers, especially for some of the APIs, is based on 1,000 characters, right? And other vendors, they charge by tokens and so forth. So understanding that variations, what's the number of characters you need and so forth will become an important factor to understand your Gen AI cost. And then finally, how do you report on the value, right? That's typically, one question is answering around the total cost of these Gen AI models. And the second is the other side, that how do you quantify the value? What are those KPIs? And then actually report on it so that you can have that end-to-end story.
Daniel, talking a little bit more about the framework and the pillars, Eric mentioned obviously skills, and then there's training and enablement. Can you dive a little bit deeper into that? Because I feel that training or skills, I'm glad it's number one, because that's one thing that is needed not only for, cloud FinOps, but that's also needed for generative AI, being that it's still so brand new to us.
Sure. And I think, first of all, this is probably an approach that can be extended well beyond Gen AI. But when it comes to training and enablement, I think one of the first things that needs to happen is to understand, first off, who needs to be trained and on what enablement is needed, and then understanding the why, understanding kind of the North Star. Where are we headed? What are we doing this for? And making sure that anything that you do around training, around enablement, is tied to an objective, a goal that ideally is linked to what you're doing from a business perspective. I know that sounds pretty simplistic, but I think it's really important, because if all you're doing is providing, let's say, training on a tool or end user type training, that can be valuable, but it isn't necessarily what's going to stick. And so you have to think broadly when it comes to training and enablement on who are all the stakeholders, who needs to be trained and on what. And there's different, it's not a one size fits all. So you really have to know your audience and you really have to know what you're aiming for. And it can't just be, typically speaking, just general awareness. That's a starting point. But in order to make something stick, in order to make it pervasive, people have to know about it. They have to be aware. And so you can generate excitement, a lot of excitement around Gen AI. So you can leverage that. You can use that as an opportunity like, hey, learn new skills. Hey, this is going to help you do your job better. That goes back to my point around people need to understand the why. Because the flip side of it is that this can also be something that creates a lot of fear. What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my job, frankly? And so cutting through that and really highlighting the benefits, this is as much communication as training and enablement is really where I'm going. But I think having this overall mindset is what will be incredibly important when it comes to having a successful kind of campaign around, if we want to do more with Gen AI, here's why, here's what this means for me, and targeted at the different parts of the organization in various levels for that matter.
Eric, I think we need a separate podcast to dive into all the pillars and the framework and break these down separate because I have so many questions on that, but I want to get to a couple of others. And Daniel, I'm going to ask this to you again, like I asked the other one. With Cloud FinOps and any cloud provider, there is generative AI already in action between cost optimization, right sizing, anything that you can kind of go around it. And a lot of them offer anomaly detection. How is it different with Gen AI? How is it improving? How are we helping with anomaly detection? What are some of the capabilities that are available or should be available with it?
Absolutely. Great question. And I would say one of the main things is what you do, what action to take. That serving that up, providing actionable, real-time intelligence that somebody can actually take a step on to either prevent a spike, to shut something down, and also to understand, hey, we have something happening here in a more real-time and actionable way. That's really where Gen AI can come into play, because it allows you to see things essentially sooner, or see patterns that you wouldn't necessarily have known until later, perhaps. And then I think the other piece here, which I already mentioned, I think it's just so important, is what steps do I take? How do I prevent something? So preventative. And that is something that I think is proactive, versus reactive, or looking backwards versus like, hey, maybe we can get ahead of that. Eric, what would you say? And I'm thinking especially about like kind of like cloud spike detection and how we, leverage Gen AI for that today.
And just to add, John, to Daniel's point, is the cost anomaly solutions, as you noted. So right, it has been there, but what we are also building within Google and Daniel alluded to earlier is a solution, right, that we are deploying for many of our enterprise customers. One, right, is certainly there's the aspect of using their customer their own data, right, their customer own data that we're training on. Two, once you have the detect the anomaly, finding where, which anomaly, which skill, which services out of 50,000 plus on Google alone, sometimes can be a needle in a haystack. The third piece is then using Gen AI generated recommendations, step by step, to how to fix those anomalies. I think that's very important, right? And then trigger it, right? So then you can then integrate into an existing workflow, make it actionable. So then become not only resurfacing the recommendations to you, telling exactly what skill, what services is causing the anomaly, then using AI generated recommendations step by step to how to go about fixing it and remediate, then integrate into the existing workflow ecosystem so then you can take action on it. I think that is something that we were very proud of when we announced this solution at the FinOps X conference last year, and we have been very successful at this, and looking forward to take this even more, right, further in advancing it as we go, for sure.
That was actually going to be my next question, where we have generative AI suggesting recommended actions to take. now we need automation, right? I've got all this stuff. And we know 30% from the FinOps survey that engineers do not perform actions. One, SLA, uptime, don't want to break anything, right? Now we need to perform these actions. And if we have automation behind them, trusted automated solutions, then I can focus on driving more business value and innovating for my company rather than going in there and clicking to perform an action. Would you agree, Eric?
Exactly right. I think that you want to empower the engineers, make it easy for them, right? And that's the whole underlying principle of FinOps is how do we empower the engineers, not only provide that visibility, but make it seamless, right? I think, why the entire sort of cloud FinOps discipline and why that's so hard as far as getting engineers to take action over is they have to worry about security. They have to worry about performance. They have to worry about resiliencies, right? Cost is often not the first thing they worry about. So we need to make sure that it's easy for them. And then I think automation is one key part of it.
Daniel, I'm going to switch gears a little bit because we're running out of time, but I want to ask you the question, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see mature FinOps teams make?
Sure, absolutely. I really appreciate this question. It's interesting, given the fact that, FinOps is still an evolving field. It's really important to also recognize that even for teams that are more mature, that have more advanced capabilities, I would say a pitfall is an idea that this is a activity that you do once, or you've reached a certain capability and then you don't need to keep improving. I think it's very, very important to recognize that this needs to be part of your ongoing operations and really core to business function, business operations. And that's just going to increase, in my opinion. So recognizing that FinOps itself and the capability and the teams and the individuals that support it need to be part of an ongoing cycle. And it is a cycle. And so it's one where you can continuously improve. You can continuously optimize. And as the technology landscape changes, as organizations change, as business changes, FinOps needs to evolve as well to support these changes. And the more you get out ahead of it in terms of cost avoidance, better data for planning when it comes to the financial side and budgeting side, the more value FinOps will bring. So the big pitfall there is to be stagnant.
Daniel, you're echoing everything that I am hearing on some of the things that it's not a once and done. Everything that I'm preaching, everything that we're talking about in the culture is that it's continuous. Landscapes change, services change, new and improved stuff come out, and you got to constantly evaluate things that you've already taken a look at. Eric, I'm going to change that question around. Or what are some of the biggest challenges that you see immature FinOps teams make?
So inversely, I often see three common mistakes, matter of fact. The first one, starting FinOps in silos, right? Going back to that definition, FinOps is driving a cultural shift. It is a responsibility across finance, technologies, and business team. So that requires a cross-functional collaboration. The second part, lack of executive sponsorship, right? You need senior level executive sponsors to drive governance and alignment. It's very hard, right? If you're trying to do a bottom up. So you do need that cross-functional alignment. And in order to do so, you need the executive level sponsorship. And the third piece, that when I talk to customers who are early, matter of fact, on their cloud journey, they think that they don't need FinOps. That FinOps is a later down the road transformation capability. That's a big, big mistake. Every customers need FinOps day one. As we think about FinOps, it's just as important as having cloud security in place as part of your foundations.
I've heard that before. And when do I implement cloud FinOps? Well, I'm not in the cloud yet, so I don't need to think about that. I'll implement it later. And then when it comes to later, they didn't realize and look at their whole business architecture and implementation. And the silos thing is spot on, where you have one person advocating for it, but not everybody else is bought in. Now, we are running out a little bit at a time. I got two very important questions I want to actually get to. Eric, I want to talk to you a little bit more about usage and rate optimization. What comes first, rate optimization or usage optimization, and why?
It's a fun question, John. So at Google,
I love Daniel's already laughing. I'm sorry. I love the humor for it.
I love the usage of the term fun.
Yeah, exactly. So we believe cost optimizations consist of three key factors. One, to your point, usage optimization, or what we call resource optimizations. Second, rate optimization, or what we call pricing optimizations. And the third, matter of fact, that I don't see a lot of people talk about is architecture optimizations, right? So as far as what comes first, if you think about just rate optimization alone, so within Google, we have this concept of reservations, and we call it commit use discounts, right? So basically, you make a committed purchase for a certain number of CPUs and so forth for your compute services. If you don't optimize and right sizing, right, in this case, usage or resource optimization first, then you essentially risk being overcommitted on your reservation purchase. So, and then subsequently, why add the third one, which is architecture optimization. Ideally, when you deploy new application on the cloud, you want to be cost-aware architecture by design. Hence, that should be very, very first step. So then you don't have to, at much inefficiency, you always have to do optimizations and revisiting your applications and your workloads. But then that gives you an edge in having a cost-optimized architecture application deployed on the cloud at the very first day. Ideally, then you have architecture by design, optimizations, then you have the usage one, and then you have rate. So you continue to do that on a continuous basis.
I've never heard of the architecture optimization. And I would think that would architecture be under, well, I can't be under usage because you're trying to change your usage. So, okay, I can understand your point on architecture, but if I'm looking at rate and usage, right? Mm-hmm. And I do want to start exploring the architecture one. So you're going to hear a little bit more about that in the future from me. I might be reaching out to you for a little more inquisitive, but you have rate and you have usage. Could you kind of do both at the same time, a little bit of rate and still while optimizing your environment, or all three at the same time and still optimizing your architecture?
Yeah, so what we have found with customers is the rate optimization is a quick, easy win, right? It's a low-hanging fruit. Making a cut purchase is pretty straightforward. However, right-sizing the instances, it sounds trivial, but then when you actually go to make that recommendations, it's difficult, right? Because then they're involving working with the applications team, looking at the CPU usage, understanding why it's such a low utilizations to begin with, and then figure it out to optimize your usage. So that's a more low efforts per se in order to address that particular issue, right? So then ideally, you do want to have that usage optimization first, right-sizing it, and then make that sort of commit use discount purchase based on your right-size instance type.
Now, Daniel, based off the recommendation, obviously doing your, are you recommending usage and then architecture, usage, and then rate, Eric?
So you do want to first start with architecture by design. Then you look at your continuous usage of where you are once you deploy in the cloud. Then you review those usage, and then you make your rate optimization based on that.
So Eric, you actually mentioned rate, usage, and then architecture, but in the order of precedence for you is architecture, usage, and then rate.
Correct.
Daniel, based off of this information, do you find that others are doing exactly what you're recommending, 3-2-1 approach? I'm going to say 3-2-1, architecture, then usage and rate, or do you see some doing a mixture of all?
I would say it's absolutely a mixed bag. And, especially where we are today, it would be unusual to work with a customer that's just starting off. And so normally we'll be working with them where they're somewhere in this journey. So I think, for me, the big takeaway from the points that Eric just highlighted is understanding where you're at. And I don't know if there is a do this, then do that, then do that sequential. I think in a perfect world, yes. I think in the real world, we have to look at all of these. Like, for example, if there's low-hanging fruit that we can just go take care of right now from a rate standpoint, then we should do that. But that is not something that will then be necessarily sustainable. So I think Eric's points around certainly the architecture side, if you will, and then usage in optimization along those lines are what will drive sustainable savings. Also, I would just say is like, hey, you should always be looking at these things. This is part of the ongoing cycle, and I really think it's really quite important to understand where you're at in each of these domains, because you have to understand where you have the most opportunity, and then probably focus on that first if you had to make a choice to see where you can drive short-term gains, but the most important thing is something that's sustainable and that you put in place the right capability so that you can actually create this ongoing sustainable function that we were talking about earlier today. But it's like anything, it's complicated.
It also depends on, obviously, you mentioned where the customer's at, where they're at in their journey. The low-hanging fruit, can I tackle, rate and usage optimization in parallel while still advancing in the architecture optimization? I'm glad you added in, because I think it's a third thing that might make a cloud FinOps book in the future. Eric, I think I know somebody you should talk to about adding your part into it. Guys, I got to wrap things up in a moment, but I do want to ask, Daniel, what does the future look like for cloud FinOps and generative AI? What are some trends?
It looks like it is more automated and user-friendly.
More automated and user-friendly. Eric, how about you?
I think that Gen AI will certainly be embedded into every single discipline of cloud FinOps. And I think that right now we are just exploring the surface. We mentioned in the white paper some of the sample use cases, whether it's cost anomaly, financial forecasting, but making accessible to everyday users. I think that will be a pivot in the adoption of FinOps at scale. Because think about the fact that everyday users can just do similar, Bard or Gemini, go ask the questions, go ask the prompt, and getting that cloud cost visibility and question answer on the spot.
I think the future for cloud FinOps and generative AI is looking bright and automated, but that's just my opinion. Eric, thank you so much for joining me. This has been an awesome discussion around cloud FinOps and generative AI. And thank you for contributing and writing this article. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure. It's been fun.
Daniel, the same thing. Thank you for contributing to this. Thank you for joining me on this awesome discussion. I really enjoyed it. I have so many more questions, and I'm going to put you on the spot and just put it out there. I think we need to do like a part 2 and dive deeper into some of these topics, but thank you.
That sounds great. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much as well.
All right, everybody. This has been another awesome episode and discussion around Faces in FinOps, powered by our great friends at ProsperOps. Be sure to hit that like, subscribe, notify, check out the latest episodes and the ProsperOps blog, because guess what? We're out of here.